Always in giving Dhamma talks, one a practice as monks is just to not think about anything, or like give a lecture or prepare any notes or anything like that. Just to say the words, the homage to the Buddha, and then let your mind go quiet and reflect a wish to offer something for the welfare of others, and then see what happens. It's an interesting practice. Actually, it does point out, I think, if any of you ever, with your minds are thinking all the time, have you ever actually said to yourself, right, think of something. Think. But if you don't think about thinking, then you think quite naturally. It happens all the time, doesn't it? This is the fourth evening of the retreat, obvious remark. Trying to just settle into this way, which is different. It's using very normal objects of experience, so normal that we can't really get geared to that level of normality. It's too normal for most of us, most of the time. Just breathe and walk up and down, and even the attitudes are so bare, so uncomplex. So just know the way things are. Notice this arising, ceasing, coming, going. Just keep coming back to the breath. Simple instruction. This kind of simplicity of what is being described, or the simplicity of the practice. Buddhist practice is totally simple, actually. It's so simple that our complicated minds completely bung up at trying to get to that simplicity. We're just always overloading with thoughts and the frustration of trying to gear up a highly complicated brain and mind and emotional complex to a very simple thing. It's kind of like trying to play the piano with gloves on. It's just so complicated. Everything that occurs is a repercussion, a thought, and a reflection, and a memory, and an association around it, isn't it? And this is just that our lives are based upon connecting and associating and remembering and planning so much of the time. This gets just conditioned into the way that we respond to our experience. Well, you see, this is the way it is. We say this is the result. It's not something one intends to do. It's the result of the way that we get conditioned by our upbringing, by always having to comment, always having to have an opinion about something. We're always thinking about everything, rather than just doing things. And so this faculty we have developed to an enormous degree. That's the intellectual capacity. We may not think we're geniuses, but the quality of the thought may not be necessarily always brilliant and stimulating, but the quantity of it is sure plentiful, copious and vigorous. Because this is one way in which human beings, when we no longer really have to manifest so much physically on the planet, we don't have to go out and wrestle with bears or hunt for our food, or do very much physical stuff. Say maybe if we're mechanically minded, or we we're engineers or whatever, that we're using our hands. But this is increasingly less and less part of our life. And even then, it's only an occupation. Most of the time, one's brain takes over and we think of ways, labour-saving devices, where one won't actually have to do anything for oneself, but we become abstracted from actual contact. You want to speak to somebody, you phone them up. Phones, computers, cars, elevators, and so forth. The ways we move around are not really associated with just the physical nature, physical reality. And the way that we relate to each other and ourselves is very conceptual. We have an idea, we form opinions about ourselves and each other. And our lives are often motivated and directed towards having opinions about ourselves. To not have an opinion makes you sound a bit dull or daft. I don't know. is the kind of one sure way to seem like a wet drip. What's your opinion about? And then you've got to have an opinion about, say, ecology, global politics, gay liberation, or whatever, some kind of view. Well, you don't. What's the matter with you then? The freedom to speak, the freedom to have one's own views is a highly treasured one in a Western society, isn't it? Think what I like, say what I like, and this is a great thing to be able to do. So even when one really doesn't have anything to say or think, we want to say it and think it. So that one feels, that you're really making use and fulfilling your life. But this tends to overstimulate and overemphasize this aspect of our existence. We have, as a species, cultivated in vast intellectual store, ideologies, religions, cultures, philosophies, sciences, etc. Just think of the different, even just something like the different political ideologies that there are, and the sub-strands of them, and the kind of different ways in which we can arrange a society, which is in itself a kind of an idea. Or the different religions, the way that we can define, say, the spiritual impulse in us, which is an impulse towards wholeness or unity, or to overcome that sense of separation, to feel enriched. How do we define the spiritual impulse? A recognition that somehow we're not just like animals walking around on our hind legs, eating, sleeping, reproducing, dying, and that's it. There's something more, a feeling that either there is or there should be, or a need for something more than that. A need to understand the mystery of life, a need to comprehend that, to know like why, who, what makes us move, what is the nature of the universe, what's the order of it. And then the vast ideas and religious ideas that have tried to explain that. Shamanism, the primitive animists, to the most recent religious side of Christian fundamentalism or whatever, New Age religions, Baha'i and so forth. Great cosmic plans for the way the world, the universe really is. And, so that when a person is trying to figure out what to do, actually life is extraordinarily complex, isn't it? Because to try to understand any one of these religions, let alone the philosophies or the sciences or the it's just more than your brain can take. So we can very well think, what can we do? Now, just this very predicament should, I think, begins to remind some of us, people who look for meditation, that actually it's become totally impossible to hold all of the ideas that there are. It can't be done. Not with the brain. We've gone over the top of what the brain can actually legitimately store or hold. So there's this turning away towards, well, let me say, what does it feel like? If we want to, rather than defining God, what does it feel like? What's God feel like? Or what does truth feel like? Tell me how it feels like. So this inclination towards Gnostic or direct experience, towards the meditation, the contemplative experience, is a very accurate one, actually, away from theory. But when you take up this path, remember or bear in mind that this is a movement away from ideas, from ideology. Even though I talk and give you these ideas, that's because there really isn't. I'd like to just kind of sit up here and beam at you all, kind of from the ethereal plane, this non-verbal. Just sit here for 9 days with a soft, serene smile on my face and twinkling eyes. That would be, really like to do that. But I think I don't know how many people could take that, or I'll kind of hold up a flower and say, this is the way it is. But most people would need something a little more complex than that. You've got something to think about, to deal with the way that they think. So we give you these ideas and reflections. But notice also that most of this stuff you forget almost as soon as the talk is over. Because it's not, you're not actually learning anything. It's not like I'm saying there are 5 of these and add 6 to that and this is how you do it. It just kind of drifts through. Something maybe shifts or changes or enlightens or there's a certain clearing, but actually you don't really learn anything on the level of ideas. Maybe you get a few pointers, like in pointing to the sense of self or holding, letting go, peace, patience. There's intellectually fairly simple ideas. Impermanence, is not a really difficult notion to think of. But so I'm giving fairly easy, simple ideas, basically because I'm not really trying to engage the brain very much, to go through the brain, goes into something that actually is meaningful to practice. Not very meaningful as an idea, but meaningful to practice. Change, to really bear that in mind, almost like if you have it almost as a mantra, change, change, change. Things do this, everything arises, passes away. Simple things such as that, or taking refuge in Buddha, in the knowing, the truth, the way it is, and the skillfulness, good practice. And actually doing these, trying to sustain this. But because this is what your aspiration is really, it's not towards an accumulation of more ideas to think about, but towards something you can actually experience. And as you take up and follow this path, recall that that it is a movement away from thought and the structures of thought. Those two. Now, by the structures of thought, I mean very much the ideal world, the idealism. We are very idealistic, and believe it or not, you're idealistic. You're high-minded. You may not, after a few days of looking into the bottom of the barrel, you may not think you're especially high-minded. But one who even looks into the way things are, it's a pretty high-minded thing to do. It's much easier there's plenty of opportunities to not look, aren't there? Plenty of opportunities to distract yourself and get away. But something in one actually keeps bringing one back to look into areas that can be boring, excruciatingly painful, or a bit confusing, not really very much at all. But there is that aspiration. But that aspiration is not something that is a thought. So, as most of our expression of our being comes out through thought, we tend to create or look for high ideals of thought. Like we create high ideals of ourselves, rather than realize that we already are pretty high as human beings. Pretty refined creatures, really, say, compared with a cave bear or a sloth or a pig. And on the human plane, then also pretty refined sensitivity on what human beings do. You consider that the life of every human being on this planet is not especially refined compared with, say, keeping the 8 precepts, sitting in a meditation retreat, watching the breath, or trying to watch the breath, being silent. Human life is, a lot of it is about just kind of fairly unimportant excitement. Sports, running around, drinking, dancing, boogieing around, zipping here and there. And these are fascinating things for human beings. People punching each other about. People pay millions of dollars to watch men punch each other, bleed, and people rip each other's arms off. It's really fascinating. Human beings people just kick a leather ball around on a field. These great huge men running around, beating each other, and people go absolutely crazy over that. Or with a little wooden stick knocking a ball, running around in circles. This is the sort of thing that human beings get really excited around. I don't get excited about watching the breath. Well, it certainly does bring up some passions, but it's not a fascination watching the breath, it's the frustration of not being able to do it. Well, that's the kind of passions it brings up. Now, our high-mindedness, you have to trust this rather than just transmute it into thought, because we can get lost into all kinds of projections from this sincere aspiration to be wise, to rise up, to get beyond suffering, to get beyond attachment and greed and hatred. This is a very good aspiration, but if you think it, then you end up always you don't meditate on it. You don't trust the meditation to do it. You try to always, through willpower or some idea, repress, struggle, complain, feel really irritated with yourself for these things because you think about them. You may not think profound, illuminating thoughts, but there's definitely the thought consciousness engages. Oh, don't do that. Oh, here I go again. Why don't I ever learn? Shut up. Stop that. Don't be like this, like that. How many times have I told you? That is thought, isn't it? I came here to be enlightened, or at least a little bit wise, and I'm going completely crazy. is a thought. Is the way that we think. Because the path of direct experience means in order to be released from this, you have to actually know it as it is. Right? Touching the earth. To be released from the world, you have to touch the earth. You actually have to enter that and work from within that. From within the doubt or the confusion or the aggression. To work from within that with a mind that is clearer or pure, a mind that is not attached to, like the Buddha mind, the awakened mind, the knowing mind, not the thinking mind. So that, a lot of us just gets to that point when we see, or we begin to appreciate something churning or stirring or holding, and we back off. What's that? Don't be like that. Stop that. How can I deal with it? How can I cope with it? I can't handle it. And then a fear arises. I can't handle it. How can I do this? The I comes up. Thought and the I come up. And they've never been able to handle anything, actually. If you look at it, if you really reflect on it, how many times have you ever been able to handle anything? What happens is, say, things get handled, and then this I comes and says, I handled that, that was pretty good. Thought is always a latecomer. The party's over and thoughts come in and say, oh, it was a great party. The battle's finished and the thoughts come along and say, oh, I just won the war. But the thought is always the shadow, the aftermath, the thing that follows behind the event. It's, like, even just looking at the sense consciousness, you see something, and then you think about it. Right? You have to actually have the experience before you can think about it. If it, you can imagine it, but a thought that's really related to an experience comes after. So we can never have a direct experience of anything through the thought of it. The idea of it. We can never think of purity. We can never really think of enlightenment, or of oneness, or of unification, or these, because these have to have happened. And essentially, this path is leading us towards, say, the knowing, which is beyond abstraction. Thought is always in terms of this and that. It's an abstract, isn't it? We step back and we form an idea. But the unification of our mind, the wholeness, or the religious experience of oneness with the divine, with the sublime, the total, the dropping away of the sense of separation. You can't abstract from that. You can't be there not being there. Here I am not being here. And and as long as there's that holding on, trying to conceive it or think of it, we're never really going to enter into oneness. Maybe this very idea, maybe you think, well, I didn't come into oneness anyway. But, the Buddha said the end of suffering. Try to express the spiritual goal in that way. Suffering and the end of suffering. Suffering always, the way the Buddha expressed it, is not just physical pain, which is certainly unpleasant, but the suffering that we can put an end to is this hanging on, grumbling, feeling offended by, wondering why it's this way, wishing it wasn't this way, wishing it was that way. That mulling over, chewing up feeling in the heart when we can hang on and hang on and hang on and worry and whinge and whine and feel really unhappy. That can be ended. And that experience is always a separation from the way things are. We're thinking the way things should be is this, and why isn't it this way? I wonder, how is it? How are things anyway? What is... So it's not actually knowing the way things are, it's either conceiving of the way things are, conceiving of the way things should be, wanting them to be this way or that way. The suffering is a separation from experience, and a comparing it and a contrasting it with some idea of the way it should be, which at that time is always just an idea, a projection, an ideal, which may be a very good ideal, but right at that very moment it's not what's happening. Consider it's just in your practice. If you like being well-intentioned, high-minded yogis, I'm sure that you think, I would like to be, I don't want to necessarily be enlightened, but just be a little bit reasonable, peaceful, and pleasant, tolerant, kind, easygoing. There's a few nice things. I could give up the big cherry, but just a little bit would be nice. And then even if you have that, a kind of half a cherry of an idea, then the moment that some unpleasant, ugly feeling arises, that gets magnified, doesn't it, by the fear, the aversion, the struggle, the conflict. And certainly we should be good and kind and peaceful and noble and so forth. But the way things are is that in this sense consciousness, this sensory realm, is that the senses only have three ways of reacting. They either like something or they dislike it, or they just feel confused and they don't quite know what to make of it. So with that, that magnified, you can imagine, brings up feelings of, say, wanting, liking, attraction, wanting more of. Is there anything that you like that you wouldn't like more of? Isn't that the automatic response? Something you like more, immediate. Whether you think it or not, that's the immediate response, isn't it? You can't say, something I like, don't give me any more of that. It's more. And then you have some more, and then more. There's something you dislike. No, don't want this, don't like it. So there's bound to be, just as long as that the senses are operating, then that's going to be the kind of chain of reaction that you have to witness. Liking, more, greed. Not liking, aversion, and so forth. And it magnifies up into craving or anger and malice. And then the not quite knowing in the middle can become either bored, dull, lethargic, stupefied, or doubt. There's these kind of unknowing qualities that go that way, don't they? So this is what we can expect from the sensory consciousness. It's not very ideal, is it? Pretty grim sounding picture. It's not ideal. You never find anything ideal in the sensory realm. You find things are the way they are. But they don't match up to our aspiration to say, find fulfillment, peace, unity, an end of suffering. You won't find it in there. Now, as most of us experience something, I would suggest, other than just a total moment by moment battery of greed, hatred, and delusion. I don't think it's like that. It may seem like that sometimes, But I think most of us experience feelings of joy, of love, of compassion, of patience, of forgiveness, of tolerance, of and so forth. Most of us experience qualities that are not just simply explained by sensory experience. Then if we think about them, we can think, well, I'm just being kind because I'm trying to repress my basic aversion to everybody. The thought forms can go that way, can't they? I'm really corrupt and greedy, but I'm trying to avoid facing up to that. So I'm being generous and kind. But then you have to know for yourself, really, whether those feelings that are spiritual come forth, or whether when they arise, there's a natural springing out of the heart. In my mind, I don't think I'm a particularly special, unique kind of human being, but those feelings tend to arise I don't have to conceive them. I don't have to think, right, now, any moment now, how can I figure out how to be generous or kind? It just feels, it arises. Sometimes I can't always express it. Go around kissing everybody, or I haven't got anything to give you really, apart from this teaching. But I do have these feelings kind of springing out of my mind. Whenever I stop thinking about myself, or something, there's a kind of relaxation, and I'm aware of the way things are, then feelings of compassion, concern for the welfare of others, and so forth. Rather beautiful things happen when I relax a bit. When some of that intenseness and self-centeredness and the mulling over of thought and the wondering and the doubting and the trying to make it this way and the not trying to be like this, and when actually one takes a break from that and walk outside, oh, how lovely the hills are. A joyous feeling arises in the mind. Quite naturally, not as a result of anything we've figured out or learned or attained, is it? You don't attain those feelings. How to attain love, loving kindness, go to a course on how to attain it. It's right there when we stop trying to attain things. And the path of enlightenment is this way. When we stop trying to attain anything, there's this weight comes off our back, and we feel clear and lightened. And so that when there's a total dropping of every kind of burden of the oughts and the shoulds and the conceiving and the contriving, then this is called complete enlightenment. And it's quite a natural process. It has to be done steadily. And this is fundamentally you're engaging the heart, or no longer thinking about things, but you're directly experiencing the way things are. Even the unpleasant, until there's no longer any shying away, any abstracting out of disgust or aversion or despair. We no longer even despair about ourselves. This is the way it is. Because even that's a kind of waste of time and indulgence, really. To always be complaining and criticising oneself is not really being honest, it's wasting time. The basic dishonesty of that is that we are there's this dishonest act of identifying with what is just the conditioned reality. The lie of it is not that certainly there is fear, greed, depression, aversion, and so forth, but that there's an I having it, owning it, is a lie. You never find that. You may find a thought, you may find an emotion, a feeling, a memory, a reaction, but you never find any individual quality walking around, owning it, creating it, having it, anywhere. Which I never found. I certainly found plenty of experiences, but nobody who has them. They just seem to come when I don't want them really, or when there's a feeling of not wanting them, they arise, they pass away. I can't really explain them, and come up with all kinds of ideas, thoughts about them, and analyse them, but actually, if I'm really honest, I don't really know why I'm this way, why I was born, what happens when I die, and so forth. Just, this is the way it is. We don't own, there's nobody owning this body, is there? There's nobody owning this mind. If you owned it, I guess you'd probably make it different. What it is. Probably make it like a computer. But perhaps more celestial. An IBM with wings on it. It's strange that our very idealism makes it difficult has to be overcome, has to be seen through, even that has to be put aside to experience the way things really are, and to work within those, enlightening them by ceasing to contend, judge, expect anything else, ceasing to move away from them. And within the way things are, we begin to practice the spiritual path, patience, kindness, benevolence, knowing, attention, looking into, investigating, curiosity. We're practicing meditation into the way we feel. These are not obstacles to meditation. This is the thing that we're meditating in order to develop the strength to come to terms with. The Buddha, the famous scene of the Buddha is enlightened, surrounded by the host of Mara. You ever seen that picture? The Buddha's enlightenment is surrounded by every kind of ugly, nasty, hobgoblin, ogre, sprite. Most unpleasant experience it must have been. This symbolic emblem of the enlightenment practice is we're actually surrounded by the host of every kind of delusion, doubt, worry, aggressiveness, fear, trembling, so forth. And it's in there that the awakened touches the earth. This is the way it is, but it's impermanent and not self. This is just the way it is. When one has put aside even the hope, then the conflict dies and the host disappear. You have to actually do this yourself, of course. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Now, when we do this internally, in practicing Dharma, we do it externally towards others. Now, I was talking to some people today, we were commenting how that one gets very, very critical. Intelligent people are very, very critical. The thinking mind is an exceptionally critical one. It deals and is developed in terms of being able to separate this from that. If you're a good thinker, it means you can define everything, you can divide up a cake into a million pieces. You can say why this is this and that's that. And this is what being a good thinker is about. Being able to analyze and dissect and form and see things in complex detail. And whatever we engross ourselves with, we think about. Whatever we involve ourselves with, we think about. It's our normal mode of coming to terms with something. Have a good think. Let me think about this. Let me think about Buddhism. Let me think about what I'm going to say. That's our normal way of anything that we're really getting interested in, or where we live. Now, say, we was saying just that, like, on a retreat situation, I've noticed this myself, when a retreat situation, one can get very, very critical. Because this is where we are, this is the only place we are right now. There's nothing to do, particularly, except to think. There's to meditate, but actually the outlet is what tends to happen is the energy is overflowing to thought. So we start defining each other, analysing each other. Guy on the back row with shifty eyes, and looks like a psychopathic type to me. She walks too heavy, she thumps on the floor when she comes in, no one crashes through the door, she eats too much. Da-da-da-da-da. And then of course the place itself, you start getting critical of the place itself. It's a bit dirty here, tumble down there, or so and so forth. Or me, sure you must have torn me to shreds by now. And then of course yourself, which is the one you really take the big stick to. Because as much as you live at the moment in this big house, and as much as you live, say, in the company of others, the one that you're constantly with, or that you think you're constantly with, is your image of yourself. So that is the thing that you're most concerned with. So there's an engrossment, and with that engrossment we think about ourselves, and then we analyse and criticise constantly. Dissect every movement, every mind state, every experience into the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, and the personae come up in a mind-boggling procession. Images of oneself, everything from the most instinctive base drives to the most kind of curiously distorted ghostly forms. I think we're kind of getting spaced out, going nutty, or totally, you feel a bit sleepy in the afternoon, you feel absolutely dreadful about that, and so on. So attention. Now this is you have to be careful with something like you say, attend, concentrate on, bring your mind to bear on. Be careful with that mincing machine in your skull. It's not that you're bringing to bear on it. It's not the chopper, the dissector, the analyzer. You just use that very lightly, knowing, touching, knowing the feeling. Keep it, just use it for that much. Just know, change, feeling, sensation. Know things like hunger, tiredness, happiness, walking, breathing, sleepy, dull. And then use the heart as the actual responder to that. When we feel bitter, annoyed, irritated, then you use the heart. Don't use your mincing machine on it. Don't use the thought consciousness. It's like if you've got a fox starts stealing your chickens, you don't go and complain to the wolf about it. If something's going, like if you're having conflict in your mind, don't bring that to the thought consciousness, because that's where the conflict is most magnified. You actually, as soon as you start to think about it, you make the conflict far, far worse. the mind, the brain, the thinking consciousness can only magnify the sense of separation, abstraction, dissection, fragmentation. The heart is the unifier. Now, I'm not talking about the organ of the blood. I'm just using a word for something that may have a significance for you. We could call it the spirit, soul, mind. But there is that. There's where is our awareness? And it's a comprehensive, comprehending, and a unitive, a cohesive quality. When we say, we can use expressions like "put your heart into it," you know what that means. So that's wherever that is, or however you like to conceive that. That's what I mean. That's why saddha, faith, is very important. Just to exercise is to develop faith, because that it's not that what you develop it on really matters. Here we're using things like Buddha rupas and images and so forth. It doesn't really matter what you use, but it is very necessary to exercise the heart till it becomes strong and brave, courageous, has a good spirit, has soul in it. We could bring that into our life, so that instead of always just thinking about things, we rise up to them from the heart. When there's bitterness or regret in our lives, then we are patient, gentle with ourselves. When there's the anxiety, we're soft and kind. When we feel this kind of desperate need for something, and we nourish ourselves with benevolence. This is not something you have to think about. If you put your heart into it, then it immediately responds like that. These are quite natural attributes. So we say things such as for the, just as on the ideal level, Buddhism is really a practice, but in conceptual terms, we use things such as the Four Noble Truths. There is, as a guide for our rational consciousness. So you've got to have something to steer with, because faith without any wisdom just is a bit, it doesn't have really the right direction. We tend to get either just spaced or start believing in things, go rather blind. You need some sense of direction. So it's not that you're totally discarding thought, but making thought the servant of Dhamma, the servant of wisdom, rather than the boss. When I was saying things like meditation on the breath, knowing the body in the body, knowing the breath and where it is, you actually put the center of consciousness, the heart consciousness, onto that, and then the knowing arises into the brain, doesn't it? We know that's long or that's a short breath. We can know the ideas come up as thoughts, but they have arisen from a direct experience. We're not just thinking them in advance or conceiving them. So thoughts do arise, but they arise dependent upon direct experience rather than substituting as substitutes for that. It's not gone crazy and out of control. So it's not a suppression, but a skillful directing and instructing of our thinking minds. And we're using like the Four Noble Truths, a reflective teaching. Certainly an idea, isn't it? It's coming in idea terms. There is suffering, there is the origin, there is the cessation, there is the path. So there is suffering. This means, look out for that sign, and then there is the origin of it. How does that work? So we've got these markers, and then we look into this. Not in order to form some conceptual notion of it, but as points for our attention to go into, to look into. Just in our life, wherever it occurs, whether we are meditating or not meditating, whether we're doing an exercise or not doing an exercise, we can use the exercise to have strengthened this our sensitivity and our awareness to the point where we can bring these teachings to bear in our lives, and then the whole of our life can be lived insightfully. Attachment and non-attachment. Wherever there is suffering, it's because there's some attachment, holding on to something that we can't have, trying to get rid of what we've got, something that we got that we don't like, trying to get something that we haven't got that we do like. This grasping, seizing. This is how it happens, isn't it? Now, a teaching like that says this is how it happens, this is how, it's not making a judgment really, saying this is like this, and then whenever there is the abandonment, the letting go, the putting aside, the relaxing, then this experience of conflict ceases. And there is a path. It's like this. It's a reflective teaching. There is. It's not blaming anybody. Saying, how many times have I told you not to attach, and there you did it again. You attached, and now you stop doing that. Stop doing that, and this is how you do it. It's not that kind of a nagging or a doctrinal thing. Thou shalt not attach. But saying there is this notice that suffering. Now ask yourself, is suffering? Really look into that. And see, there's a holding on there, isn't there? Just if we use these words, these ideas as ways of measuring it. And then when there isn't suffering, or when it stops, it's because something in us has let go, has relaxed. And once we've seen this, then we can actually begin to practice like that. And the letting go. Now if you're idealistic about it, you think to yourself, I should not attach. There should be no attachment. I should not suffer. There will be no suffering. And this is, of course, setting yourself up for 15 rounds with a heavyweight. Getting into the boxing ring and saying, there will be no fight. I will win, but there will be no fight. So we're not making it into an ideal of what there should or shouldn't be, but this is how it is. So when we notice attachment, then noticing it means that very noticing, right? If you're working within attachment, and you can probably recognize these, but you work within it, you actually experience attachment holding on, and then you work within that with a mind that is free from any idea of there should or shouldn't be. It doesn't attach. It's not holding on to anything. So this is the way it is. And just that relaxation just suffuses. If you allow that, if you just wait with that feeling of this is the way it is, then this peaceful quality radiates through that, and something is just we abandon, we put aside. We don't need to hold anymore, because the peace of non-attachment is such a pleasing and gentle and loving feeling that nothing's worth holding on to compared with that. It's far, Nibbana, the non-attachment, is just much more pleasant than anything we can hold on to. So, unless you're a complete idiot, which I'm sure you're not, you don't, it doesn't take you long to figure out this is better than that. So we don't need that, do we? So it just happens quite naturally. And our practice has to be very realistic. We actually notice attachment and then get within that, really experience where that is, with a mind that's free from any shoulds and shouldn'ts, aggravation, impatience, wanting it to go away, not wanting to be there, and so forth. And this is what we call letting go of suffering. We say it may be letting go, I should let go, turns into another kind of attachment, doesn't it? Which means really get rid of, go away, throw it away, dump it, stop it. So, these are, all Dhamma has to be experienced this way, rather than as ideas. The Buddha said the Dhamma is like a snake. If you catch it behind the head, then you've got it. If you catch it by the tail, it whips round and bites you. The simile of the snake. So the old non-attachment viper comes around and nips you pretty smart, doesn't it? When you come to the I should not attach, I should not be this way. In using meditation objects, just in this situation as it is, remember the idealistic, wanting to get good results, putting a lot of effort into it, all these good qualities come, if you grasp them by the tail, right? Have to actually, with mindfulness, we're bringing ourselves to just one moment, just being content to get one moment, even one moment of recognizing that we're not in the here and now, is called being in the here and now. Because the here and now, you can't just have an idea of that. The ideal of the here and now is always lovely and clear and bright and crisp, and there's void and sunyata and so forth. But the entrance to the here and now is into all these thoughts about the future and the past, and that's what's so often in our minds. You have to enter into that. You want to come into the here and now, and this momentary attention, a span of attention is pretty limited. You have to strengthen it by encouraging, not by judging or criticizing, by encouraging through every moment of beginning again, and so forth. And we're also in giving talks, we're also instructed that when you finish saying what you had to say, you stop. So I'll stop for tonight.